The city was still half asleep when she stepped out of her small apartment, clutching her old handbag and a cup of instant coffee that had already gone cold. Her shoes were worn out, her eyes red from lack of sleep, but she moved quickly through the empty street. Every minute mattered. She was late again. The bus stop was a few blocks away, and her little boy's voice echoed in her head. "Mom, will you be home tonight?" he had asked before she left. She hadn't known how to answer. She worked 2 jobs now, and most nights she barely made it home before midnight. By the time the bus came, her hands were trembling from the cold. She got in, found a corner seat, and leaned her head against the window. Her reflection stared back, tired, older than her age, but still holding on somehow. The ride to work took nearly 40 minutes. It was her quiet time, the only part of the day where she didn't have to speak, smile, or apologize for being slow. She often thought about how different life used to be, before her husband left, before the bills piled up, before she had to choose between buying food and paying rent. At the diner where she worked, the smell of fried eggs and coffee filled the air. She tied her apron tightly, forced a smile, and began serving customers. Her boss, an impatient man, kept shouting orders from behind the counter. "Table 3, what's taking so long?" "I'm on it," she replied quickly, carrying plates that were too hot for her hands. By mid-morning, her back hurt and her feet burned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Every extra dollar meant something. Milk for her son, bus fare for the week, maybe a small treat if things went well. During her short break, she checked her phone. There was a message from her neighbor who watched her son before school. "He's doing his homework. Don't worry," the message said. That was enough to make her smile, even if it was just for a second. The day passed like every other. Customers came and went. Some were kind and polite. Others treated her like she wasn't even there. She didn't let it bother her anymore. Life had taught her to keep her head down and move forward. By evening, she rushed home, picked up her son, helped him eat dinner, and tucked him into bed. He held her hand until he fell asleep, and she sat beside him for a while, brushing his hair softly. It was the only time she felt peace, watching his small face rest without worry. Then, after washing the dishes and setting out his school clothes, she changed into her cleaning uniform. Another shift waited. Her night job was in an office building downtown. She didn't mind it much. The hallways were quiet, and nobody looked down on her. It was just her, the sound of the vacuum, and her thoughts. Sometimes she'd hum softly, songs her mother used to sing when life felt too heavy. But that night, something inside her felt heavier than usual. Her back ached more, her eyes burned, and her hands shook when she tried to open the cleaning supply cabinet. She had been running on fumes for days. When the shift ended, it was almost midnight. She walked out into the cool night air, breathing deeply, hoping to stay awake long enough to make it home. The last bus of the night was nearly empty when she climbed in. She sat near the middle, clutching her bag on her lap. A man in a dark suit sat beside her. He looked out of place on this late bus, a neat, calm, probably someone important. She barely noticed him, though. Her eyelids were too heavy. The streetlights flickered outside as the bus rolled through the quiet city. The sound of the engine and the soft hum of tires on the wet road began to lull her to sleep. She told herself she'd close her eyes just for a minute. But exhaustion pulled her in. Her head leaned slightly to the right, and before she knew it, it rested on the stranger's shoulder. He turned his head, surprised. His first instinct was to move away. But when he looked at her and really looked, he saw the dark circles under her eyes, the faint trace of tears on her cheek, and the uniform she wore. She looked like she hadn't rested in days. He took a quiet breath and stayed still. For the next 20 minutes, she slept deeply. The man didn't move or speak. He simply let her rest. When the bus stopped at the final station, the driver announced the end of the route. The man gently tapped her arm. "Miss," he said softly. Her eyes shot open. She straightened up quickly, embarrassed. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, It's all right," he interrupted, his tone calm and kind. "You must have had a long day." She nodded awkwardly, clutching her bag tighter. "I'm really sorry," she said again, standing up quickly. Her cheeks burned with shame. She didn't even look at him as she hurried off the bus. The man watched her go, still sitting there as the driver began to sweep the floor. Something about her lingered in his mind. Outside, the woman walked down the dark street toward her small apartment. Her legs felt weak and her heart beat fast, still embarrassed about what happened. She laughed softly under her breath. Great, she whispered to herself. Falling asleep on a stranger now. What's next? When she reached home, her son was still asleep. She changed quietly, looked at the calendar on the wall and sighed. Rent was due in 3 days. Her pay wouldn't cover it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing her temples. For the first time in a while, she felt like giving up. But then she looked at her son's little backpack by the door. A small drawing was sticking out, 2 stick figures holding hands with the words "Me and Mommy" written in uneven letters. That made her smile again. She whispered to herself, "You can do this." Just one more day. The next morning came too soon. She forced herself out of bed, dressed, and got her son ready for school. She barely tasted breakfast. Her mind kept drifting back to last night, to that moment on the bus. She felt foolish, but there was something strange about it, too. The man hadn't been annoyed or rude. He'd been kind. As the day went on, she tried to push the memory away, but life, as usual, had other plans. At the diner, the rush hour crowd hit early. Orders piled up, plates clattered, and the boss's voice grew louder. She kept moving, but fatigue made her slower. When she accidentally dropped a tray, the crash echoed through the diner. The boss rushed out, furious. "Do you know how much that costs? If you can't handle this, maybe you should stay home." "I'm sorry," she said softly, trying not to cry. "You're always sorry," he snapped. "One more mistake and you're done." She nodded quickly and went back to work, her hands shaking. By afternoon, she could barely keep up. The world around her felt blurry. She didn't even notice when the door opened and a well-dressed man walked in, the same man from the bus. He ordered a coffee and sat quietly at a corner table. He looked around the small diner, and when his eyes fell on her, recognition flashed across his face. She didn't see him at first, too busy cleaning tables and serving customers. When she finally did, she froze for half a second. He smiled gently and she looked away, pretending not to notice. Her face flushed again, remembering the bus. When she brought his coffee, he said softly, "You work here?" She nodded, trying to stay polite. "Yes, sir, I do. Sorry again for last night." "I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. You looked like you needed the rest." She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Yeah, I guess I did." He studied her face for a moment. There was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe concern. But he didn't push the conversation. Instead, he left a generous tip, thanked her for the coffee, and quietly walked out. She watched him go, confused. Why would someone like him even remember her? The rest of the day passed in a blur. But as she rode home that night, she couldn't help thinking about him. The quiet kindness, the calm tone. It was strange how a simple gesture could stay in your mind long after it was over. Back home, she tucked her son into bed again and stared out the window. The city lights flickered like little stars on the ground. Somewhere out there, that man was probably sitting in an office or maybe at dinner with friends, completely unaware that a single mom was thinking about how kind he had been to her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he worked. She only knew that for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible, and she didn't know it yet. But that small, silent moment on the bus was about to change her life forever. The next few days moved like a slow blur. She kept working at the diner, trying not to think too much about the man from the bus. Still, his calm eyes and kind words stayed in her mind like a quiet memory she couldn't shake off. Every morning was the same. She'd wake up before sunrise, prepare breakfast for her son, pack his small school bag, and walk him to the neighbor's door. She always kissed his forehead before she left, promising, "Mom will be back soon, okay?" Then she'd rush to catch the bus again. Sometimes, as she sat near the window, she found herself looking at strangers and wondering about their lives. Were they tired too? Were they happy? Did they ever feel invisible the way she did? At work, her coworkers talked about their weekend plans and vacations, things she hadn't experienced in years. She smiled when they spoke, but deep inside, she felt a small ache. Her world had become just work, rent, and survival. On the 4th morning after the bus incident, she woke up to a notice slipped under her door. It was a reminder from the landlord, rent due in 3 days, no extensions. Her stomach twisted with worry. She sat on the floor, holding the paper, feeling her heart sink. She had been trying so hard, working 2 jobs, cutting corners on food and clothes, and still, it wasn't enough. That afternoon, the diner was busier than usual. People rushed in from the rain outside, ordering hot coffee and soup. She kept her head down, serving table after table. The bell above the door kept ringing, and her boss's voice carried from the kitchen. But in the middle of all that noise, something unexpected happened. When she turned toward the counter, she froze for a second. The man from the bus was standing there again. He was wearing a dark coat this time, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He noticed her instantly and gave a small smile. She felt a wave of nervousness but managed to greet him. "Good afternoon. What can I get you today?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Just a coffee. Black, please." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the coffee. When she placed it in front of him, he said softly, "Rough day?" She gave a quick laugh, the kind people give when they don't want to cry. "It's always a rough day," she said lightly. He tilted his head a little. "You work both day and night, don't you?" She blinked, surprised. "How do you?" He smiled gently. "You were wearing a cleaning uniform that night on the bus. And now this one. You must be exhausted." Her face turned red. "I guess I am." "But you do what you have to do, right?" He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, you do what you have to." For a few moments, neither spoke. The sound of the diner filled the silence. Cups clinking, rain tapping against the glass. The low hum of people talking. When he finished his coffee, he left cash on the counter, more than enough to cover the bill, and gave her a small nod before walking out. She watched him leave, wondering why someone like him would even bother remembering her. He seemed like he lived in another world, one where money wasn't always a problem, where people didn't have to choose between sleep and survival. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it, not because she was curious about him, but because his kindness had caught her off guard. In her life, people rarely noticed her unless she made a mistake. The next day was colder. Her hands were numb when she stepped off the bus. The diner floor felt slippery under her worn shoes. She was moving trays when her boss suddenly called her to the back office. He was holding a piece of paper, a schedule change. "I'm cutting your hours," he said flatly. "We don't have enough customers during lunch. You can work mornings only." She froze. "But sir, I need those hours." "I can't afford," he interrupted, not even looking up. "It's not personal. It's business. You can go now." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to plead, but she knew it wouldn't help. She nodded silently and walked out. Outside, the wind hit her face hard. She stood there in her thin jacket, holding her bag, trying to stop her tears. People walked past her, umbrellas covering their heads, not noticing her pain. She didn't realize she had started walking until she found herself at the bus stop again. She sat on the cold bench, staring at the ground, the weight of everything pressing on her chest. For a long time, she didn't move. She just sat there lost. Then a car slowed down near the stop. She didn't look up at first, but when the window rolled down, she heard a familiar voice. "Are you all right?" It was him, the man from the bus. The same calm voice, the same quiet tone. She blinked, surprised. "You again?" He smiled faintly. "Looks like it." He parked the car nearby and got out, holding an umbrella. "You look upset. Did something happen?" She hesitated, unsure how much to say. But the words just came out. "I lost my job. They cut my hours. I don't know what I'm going to do." He listened without interrupting, his expression gentle. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "That's not fair. You work hard." She shrugged weakly. Hard work doesn't mean much when bills don't care. There was silence for a few seconds, the sound of rain filling the space between them. Then he said something unexpected. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She frowned. "What? Why?" He smiled reassuringly. "It's not far. Trust me." Something in his voice felt safe, calm, steady, almost familiar. She hesitated but eventually nodded. "Okay, just for a little while." He opened the car door for her and they drove through the quiet city streets. The rain softened into a mist. She looked out the window, the streetlights blurring as they passed. After a few minutes, he stopped in front of a small cafe. The sign outside said Bright Cup Coffee. They walked inside. It was warm and cozy, the smell of roasted beans in the air. The barista greeted him with respect, calling him sir. That's when she realized this man wasn't just a customer. He owned the place. He turned to her and said, "One of the managers quit last week." I've been looking for someone reliable to help out. You said you needed work. Maybe this could be it. She stared at him, stunned. You're serious? He nodded, completely. It's not charity. You'd be paid fairly and the hours are flexible. I think you'd fit in well here. She shook her head slowly. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. He smiled faintly. Maybe because I've been where you are. Maybe because I know what it's like to need someone to give you a chance. Her eyes softened. She wanted to believe him, but the world had taught her not to trust things that seemed too good to be true. He must have noticed her hesitation because he added, Come tomorrow. Just try one shift. If you don't like it, you can walk away. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I don't even have proper clothes for a cafe job. He chuckled softly. We'll figure that out. Just bring yourself. She smiled for the first time that day. Okay, I'll come. When he dropped her off near her apartment, she thanked him quietly. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you. He nodded once. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new start. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. For the first time in months, she felt something other than exhaustion. A small spark of hope. The next morning, she woke before her alarm. She put on her cleanest shirt and brushed her hair neatly. Her son noticed the difference right away. You look happy today, he said with a sleepy smile. She kissed his forehead. Maybe something good is finally happening. At the cafe, the air smelled like fresh pastries and coffee beans. The staff welcomed her kindly. The man introduced her as the new helper. She noticed how respectfully they spoke to him, how easily he smiled at everyone. He wasn't just a boss. He was someone people liked. As she learned how to take orders and serve customers, she felt nervous but strangely comfortable. The place had warmth, laughter, friendly chatter, people enjoying small moments. Every time she made a mistake, he'd guide her patiently, never raising his voice. You'll get the hang of it, he said. You're doing fine. By the end of the day, she was tired but happy. It felt good to be somewhere new, somewhere that didn't remind her of failure. When she left, he walked her to the door. So what do you think? She smiled. I think I needed this more than I realized. He nodded. Then we'll see you tomorrow. As she stepped outside into the evening light, the city felt a little brighter. For once, the world didn't seem so cruel. She still didn't know who he really was, just that he was someone who saw her when no one else did, and deep down, she knew this wasn't just luck. It was something more, the beginning of a change she had been waiting for without even knowing it. The next morning, she woke up before the sun, her heart already beating fast with a mix of fear and hope. She stood in front of the small mirror by her kitchen window, brushing her hair carefully. It had been a long time since she had felt nervous for something good. Usually it was the kind of nervous that came before bad news, overdue rent, a warning at work, a bill she couldn't pay. But today felt different. Her son watched her from the table, munching on toast. You look nice, Mom, he said, grinning through a mouthful of crumbs. She smiled. Do I? I'm going to start a new job today. His eyes widened. So you don't work at the diner anymore? She shook her head. No, not anymore. This new place is different, a cafe. They make coffee and muffins and things like that. He nodded proudly. Can I come one day? Of course, she said softly. One day soon. After dropping him at school, she caught the morning bus downtown. Her hands fidgeted the whole ride. She didn't know why she felt this nervous. Maybe because it was the first time in years someone had given her a chance, without asking what she could offer in return. When she arrived at the cafe, the man from the bus was already there, talking to one of the baristas. He turned as she walked in, his usual calm smile easing her worries a little. You made it, he said warmly. Of course, she replied, smiling shyly. I said I would. He handed her a simple apron. Let's get you started. The cafe was cozy and bright, filled with the smell of coffee beans and fresh bread. Customers chatted softly. Music played in the background and sunlight poured through the wide windows. She felt like she had stepped into a different world, one that didn't rush, shout, or judge. The morning passed quickly as she learned the ropes, how to take orders, handle the register, clean tables, and serve drinks with a steady smile. At first she worried she'd make mistakes, but he was patient. When she dropped a cup by accident, he just laughed lightly. It's fine, he said. We all drop things sometimes. I once spilled an entire pot of coffee on my first day. She laughed too, shaking her head. Somehow I can't picture you making mistakes. Oh, I've made plenty, he replied. That's how I got here. She looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He shrugged. Let's just say success doesn't come easy. It's built on a mountain of failures. Something about the way he said it made her think maybe he wasn't as different from her as she thought. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but happy. Her feet hurt, but her heart felt light. She thanked him before leaving, and he simply said, "See you tomorrow." That night, she slept without worry for the first time in weeks. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, her life began to shift. She got used to the rhythm of the cafe, the smell of roasted beans, the regular customers who greeted her by name, the soft buzz of laughter and conversation. She even made friends among the other workers. The man came by often, usually in the mornings. He would sit by the window with his laptop, typing quietly, occasionally looking up to check how things were going. Every now and then, he'd ask her how she was doing, and she'd answer with a smile. Once, during a quiet afternoon, she finally gathered the courage to ask him the question that had been in her mind since the day they met. "Why did you help me?" He looked up from his screen and smiled faintly. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing." She blinked. "You had nothing?" He nodded. "A long time ago. I grew up in a small neighborhood. My father passed early, and my mother worked 2 jobs, kind of like you. I used to take night buses to my classes because I couldn't afford anything else. One night I fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder too. I woke up to find a note in my pocket. It said, 'Keep going, you're going to make it.' There was a $10 bill folded inside. That small gesture changed how I saw the world." She stared at him quietly, her eyes softening. "And now you're returning that kindness." He smiled again, but this time there was something thoughtful in his expression. "Maybe. Or maybe I just saw myself in you." Her throat tightened a little. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked away as if trying to keep things professional, but there was warmth in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. One evening, after closing, she stayed behind to clean the counter while the rest of the staff left. He was still there, checking inventory. The quiet between them felt peaceful. "You're really good at this," he said after a while. She laughed softly. "Good at wiping tables?" "No," he said. "Good at making people feel welcome. That's something you can't teach." She smiled, a little embarrassed. "Maybe it's because I know what it feels like not to be welcomed anywhere." He nodded slowly, as if he understood that better than most. But just when life started feeling lighter, something unexpected happened again. One afternoon, a new manager from another branch visited the cafe. He was sharp-tongued and proud. He saw her talking to the man near the counter and later pulled her aside. "You should be careful," he said in a low voice. "People are starting to notice how much attention you're getting from him." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "I mean, don't forget he's the owner. People talk. They might think you're trying to get special treatment." Her stomach dropped. "That's not true," she said quickly. He shrugged. "Maybe not, but rumors don't care about truth." She went home that night with a heavy heart. She couldn't sleep. The last thing she wanted was to cause problems or seem ungrateful. The next morning, she came early to work and quietly left a handwritten note on the counter before he arrived. It simply said, "Thank you for everything. I can't stay, but I'm grateful you believed in me." Then she walked away. When he came in later and saw the note, his face fell. He looked around the empty cafe, realizing she was gone. For a few moments, he just stood there, the paper trembling in his hand. He didn't waste time. He got in his car and drove straight to her apartment building. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." He shook his head firmly. "You didn't cause trouble. You worked hard. You earned your place. Don't let anyone take that from you." She looked down, her voice small. "People are talking. I can't afford to lose another job," he sighed. "Then let me offer you something better." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I want you to manage one of my new cafe branches. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands people. You've proven that. It'll be your own place. Your decisions, your team. You'll get proper pay and bonuses." Her mouth fell open slightly. "Me manage a cafe? I've never done anything like that." You've been doing it every day without realizing it, he said gently. You treat people with kindness. That's leadership. Tears filled her eyes, but she tried to hide them. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. You deserve a chance to build something for yourself. She hesitated. I don't want pity. This isn't pity, he said softly. It's trust. She bit her lip, emotions fighting in her chest. For so long, people had looked past her, like she was invisible. Now someone saw her potential. It didn't feel real. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. All right. I'll try. He smiled, a quiet relief showing in his eyes. Good. Then it settled. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Why me? He looked back and said, Because you never stopped trying, even when life gave you every reason to. When the door closed behind him, she sat down, her heart racing. For years, she had been surviving. Now, for the first time, she had a chance to live. That night, as her son slept beside her, she looked out the window and whispered, Maybe things can change after all. And somewhere across town, the man who once let a stranger sleep on his shoulder sat in his office smiling to himself. He didn't know why he cared so much, but he knew one thing. Helping her had brought something back into his own life too, something he hadn't felt in years. Lena woke up early that morning with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something lighter. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have to rush between two jobs or worry about finding a bus on time. She had one steady job now, one that didn't drain the life out of her. When she looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. The tiredness was still there, but there was a small smile too, a spark of hope she hadn't seen in years. She made breakfast for Eli, who sat at the small kitchen table with his toy cars scattered around. Mom, do you have to work late again today? He asked in his sleepy voice. No, baby, she said softly, brushing his hair back. Mom's job is during the day now. I'll be home when you're done with homework. The smile that spread across his face made her heart warm. That moment alone was worth everything. She dropped him at her neighbor's and caught the bus to the cafe Daniel had helped her get a job at. When she entered, the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee filled the air. The sound of cups clinking and gentle chatter made the place feel alive. She tied her apron and got to work. It didn't take long for her to blend in. Customers liked her warm smile and how she remembered small details about them. She had a way of talking that made people feel seen, even if it was just for a minute. Daniel visited every few days. He would stop by, talk to the manager, and sometimes watch from a corner table while working on his laptop. He never treated her differently. He didn't act like he was doing her a favor. In fact, most of the staff didn't even know he was the owner. He liked it that way. At first, Lena tried to avoid him. She didn't want to look like she was taking advantage of his kindness. But one day, when the cafe was almost empty, he asked her to sit for a minute. How are things going? He asked, sipping his black coffee. They're good, she said with a shy smile. I'm learning a lot. Everyone's nice. He looked at her for a moment and said, You're doing great. I checked with the manager. Customers already ask for you by name. Her cheeks warmed. I'm just doing my job, she said. That's what makes you different, he replied. You do it with heart? She didn't know how to respond to that. It had been so long since anyone had said something kind to her without expecting anything in return. For years, she had lived only to survive, but now she was learning to live again. As weeks passed, the cafe began getting busier. Lena learned to make new drinks, help train new staff, and even suggest small ideas that improved service. Daniel noticed every detail, though he never made it obvious. One afternoon when he came in, he saw Lena helping a customer who dropped his coffee. Instead of getting upset, she laughed, cleaned it up quickly, and gave him another cup on the house. Daniel smiled quietly. It was exactly the kind of energy he wanted in his business. Later that day, he asked her to join him outside for a few minutes. They sat on a bench near the cafe entrance. You know, he said, I started like you. Lena looked surprised. You? He nodded. When I was your age, I worked in a small bakery. My boss used to yell at me for every mistake. I almost quit 100 times, but I needed the money. One day I promised myself that if I ever had my own business, I'd never treat people like that. She listened carefully, her eyes soft. You really kept that promise, she said. He smiled faintly. I try to. People just need someone to believe in them sometimes. Something about that moment stayed with her long after he left. But life wasn't always smooth. A few of her coworkers started to notice Daniel visiting often. They began whispering behind her back, assuming there was something more between them. She ignored it at first, pretending not to hear. But the whispers grew louder. One day during lunch break, she overheard two girls talking. "She must be special to him," one said. "No one else gets visits from the boss." Lena froze. Her chest tightened. She didn't want people to think she was being favored. She had worked too hard to earn her place there. That evening, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, those words echoed in her head. The next morning, she made a decision. After her shift ended, she walked into the manager's office and quietly placed her resignation letter on the desk. "Why are you leaving?" the manager asked, shocked. "I just think it's time for something new," she said softly. She didn't mention the rumors. She didn't want to create problems. She thanked them for everything, untied her apron and walked out without looking back. When Daniel came to the cafe a few days later and didn't see her, he asked where she was. The manager hesitated, then handed him her resignation letter. His jaw tightened as he read it. There was no reason written, just a polite thank you note. He knew right away that something was wrong. That night, he couldn't focus on anything. He kept replaying every interaction in his head, wondering if he had done something that made her uncomfortable. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that. It was how people could be, quick to judge, slow to understand. The next morning, Daniel decided to find her. He called the manager for her address, saying he needed to send her final pay. Then he drove across town to the small apartment complex where she lived. When he knocked, there was no answer at first. Then the door opened slightly. Lena stood there looking tired and pale. Boxes were stacked behind her. "Are you moving?" he asked quietly. She looked down and nodded. "Yeah, I fell behind on rent. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while." Daniel stepped closer, but his tone stayed calm. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to bother you again," she said. "You already helped me once. I can't keep depending on you." He looked at her for a long moment, seeing the hurt she tried to hide. "You're not depending on me," he said. "You worked for everything you earned. You left because of what people said, didn't you?" Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't answer, but that was enough. "I don't care what anyone says," he continued softly. "You have nothing to prove. You belong where you were, not because of me, but because of your work." She swallowed hard. "It's not that simple," she said. "People talk. They'll always find something." He took a slow breath. "Then let's give them something real to talk about," he said suddenly. She frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the boxes behind her, then back at her tired face. "I'll explain tomorrow. Just meet me at the cafe at 10. "I'm not sure." "Please," he interrupted gently. "Just trust me once more." Something in his voice made her pause. She finally nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. That night, Lena sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker. Part of her wanted to believe something good could come out of this, but the other part was too used to disappointment. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering a small prayer that maybe, just maybe, things would turn out differently this time. The next morning, she arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. Daniel was already there, waiting with a calm smile. He held 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "Come," he said. "We're going somewhere." They drove to a quiet part of town where a small shop was being renovated. The windows were covered with paper, and the smell of fresh paint hung in the air. Lena looked around, confused. "What is this place?" she asked. Daniel turned to her and said, "Your future." Her mouth fell open slightly. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "You'll see." The workers inside greeted him politely. He led her in, pointing at the half-finished counter, the new coffee machines being installed, the wooden tables lined up by the window. "This," he said softly, "is going to be your cafe." Lena froze. Her mind couldn't process the words. "My cafe?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "You've earned it. I was planning to open a new branch anyway, but I want you to run it. Not as an employee, as a partner." Her heart started to race. No, I can't. I don't have money. I don't know how to." "You'll learn," he said gently. "And you don't need money. You've already proven something more important. Loyalty, kindness, and hard work. That's worth more than any investment." Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, trying to hold them back. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "Because someone once gave me a chance when I had nothing. I'm just passing it on." For the first time in years, Lena didn't know what to say. She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel didn't try to stop her. He just stood quietly, letting her feel everything she had been holding inside. That day, something changed. She wasn't just a struggling single mom anymore. She was someone with a new beginning, one she had earned through every sleepless night and every small act of courage. And though she didn't know what the future would hold, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't alone anymore. The next few weeks were the busiest of Lena's life. From early morning till night, she worked beside the construction team, choosing colors for the walls, arranging tables, and testing the new coffee machines. It didn't feel real at first. Every time she looked at the signboard being made with her cafe's name on it, her hands would tremble slightly. She still couldn't believe it was happening. Daniel stopped by often to check on the progress. He never acted like the boss. Instead, he treated her like a partner, asking her opinion on everything, from the menu design to the kind of lights that should hang above the counter. One evening, when everyone had left, Lena stood alone inside the half-finished cafe, staring at the walls glowing under soft yellow bulbs. She whispered to herself, "This used to be just a dream." Her voice cracked a little. Daniel walked in quietly behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "A dream that's almost ready to open," he said with a small smile. She turned, her eyes glistening. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said gently. "You already are, and by proving I was right to believe in you." Lena took the cup from him and sat down on a chair, still wrapped in plastic. "I was so scared," she admitted. "When you told me this was mine, I thought you'd change your mind the next day." He laughed softly. "I don't make promises I can't keep." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. The world seemed to slow down just for that moment. When the cafe finally opened 2 weeks later, it was everything she had imagined and more. The smell of freshly baked pastries filled the air, and the sound of laughter from the customers made her heart feel full. Her son, Eli, stood behind the counter proudly in a little apron that said, "Helper." The first customer to walk in was an old man who lived nearby. He smiled warmly and said, "New cafe, huh? Smells amazing in here." Lena grinned. "You're our very first customer. Your coffee's on the house." By noon, the place was packed. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood that a kind, cheerful woman had opened a cafe that felt like home. People came not just for the food, but for the warmth. It was the kind of place where strangers could sit together and leave as friends. Daniel came by later that day, quietly sitting at a corner table. He watched her move around, greeting customers, laughing with them, helping her small team, wiping tables and refilling cups without being asked. She looked confident now. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something bright and steady. When she finally noticed him, she smiled and came over. "You're sitting there like a secret inspector," she teased. He chuckled. "I'm just watching a dream come to life." She laughed softly. "You sound like you're writing a story." "Maybe I am," he said. "One that deserves to be told." Over the next few months, the cafe became one of the most popular spots in the area. Local newspapers wrote about Lena's journey from a struggling single mother to a business owner. Customers shared her story online, calling her cafe the Heart Stop. She didn't like the attention much, but she was grateful. Every bit of it helped her keep the doors open and the lights on. With success came new responsibilities. She hired 2 other single parents who had been out of work for months. She remembered what it felt like to stand at a bus stop, wondering if life would ever change. She wanted to be the reason someone else didn't lose hope. Daniel continued to help quietly from behind the scenes. He visited less often now, wanting her to shine on her own. But he always kept an eye on her progress. Sometimes he'd drop by unannounced, pretending to be a customer, ordering coffee just to watch her in her element. One evening, Lena was closing up when she found a small note on one of the tables. It said, "You've built something beautiful, be proud." Now she smiled and slipped it into her pocket. That night she walked home with Eli, holding his small hand. "Mom, you're famous now," he said proudly. She laughed. "I don't need to be famous. I just want to make good coffee and make people happy." He squeezed her hand. "You already do that." The simplicity of his words brought tears to her eyes. She looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not sure if she was talking to God, fate, or the man who had believed in her when no one else did. A few months later, Daniel invited her to a business event downtown. It was a formal gathering with other cafe owners and entrepreneurs. Lena hesitated at first, feeling out of place, but he insisted. "You deserve to be there," he said. When she walked in, dressed in a simple blue dress, heads turned. She looked graceful yet humble. Daniel introduced her to everyone, proudly calling her "my partner." People were impressed by her story. Some even asked her for advice on how to create a cafe with the same warm atmosphere. Later that night, as the event ended, Lena and Daniel stood outside the hall, watching the city lights. "You know," she said softly, "I used to take the bus past this building every night after work. I never thought I'd ever step inside." Daniel looked at her and said, "Life has a funny way of surprising us." She smiled. "Yes, it does." As time passed, their friendship deepened. They didn't need big words to express what they felt. Their bond was built on respect, kindness, and shared experiences. One rainy evening, a year after the cafe opened, Lena was traveling to another part of the city to help train a new team for a second branch Daniel encouraged her to open. The bus was nearly empty, and the rhythmic sound of rain against the windows made her sleepy. She leaned her head back, eyes half closed, and a memory came rushing back. That first night on the bus, when she had fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder. It felt like a lifetime ago. She smiled softly to herself, remembering the embarrassment, the exhaustion, and then the kindness that followed. That simple moment had changed everything. When the bus stopped, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Daniel. "You still owe me one good night's sleep." She laughed quietly, her eyes filling with tears. She typed back, "Maybe next bus ride." Outside, the rain had stopped and the city lights shimmered against the wet streets. She stepped off the bus holding her umbrella and looked up at the glowing sign of her new cafe across the street, her name shining proudly above the door. She walked in, took a deep breath, and smiled at the sight of her new team preparing for the grand opening. Every cup, every table, every warm greeting carried a piece of her journey. When she turned around, she saw Daniel standing by the door, watching her with that calm, proud expression he always had. He didn't say anything, and he didn't need to. Their eyes met, and that was enough. Lena walked over, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It's really happening again," she said. "It is," he replied. "And this time you did it all on your own." She shook her head. "No, you gave me a start." "I just kept walking," Daniel smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person to believe and another to keep going." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching as the lights inside the cafe grew brighter. Outside, the night was calm. The world felt steady, and the sound of laughter floated through the glass. Lena took a deep breath, her heart full. She had come a long way from that tired woman on the bus. She was no longer just surviving, she was living, building, and giving back. Before Daniel left, he turned and said, "You know, I think that bus ride was the best meeting I've ever had." She smiled through her tears. "Me too." As he walked away, Lena looked around her cafe, her second home, her second chance, and whispered softly, "Thank you." Then she went back behind the counter, ready to welcome the next customer with the same warmth that had once changed her life. The story of the woman who fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder wasn't just about luck or charity. It was about faith, the kind that stays even when everything else falls apart. It was about kindness that expects nothing in return, and how one simple act can start a ripple that changes lives forever. And from that day on, every cup of coffee she served carried a story of struggle, hope, and the quiet power of compassion.